Good morning. It is 10:30. We are in our second negotiations between the City of Lamarque and the Lamarque Police Officers Association. We will go ahead and turn this over to our lead negotiator, Mr. Cesar Garcia.
Good morning, all. For the sake of all those that are joining, if we could please have an introduction of all the folks that are present, and then we'll have an introduction of folks that might be listening in through our Zoom. Mr. Kerr, if you could please begin.
My name is John Kerr. I'm with the Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas, and I'm here as assistance for negotiation with the Lamarque Police Association. Yeah.
My name is Conan King. I'm the president of the Lamarque Police Association.
Kenneth Hernandez, the vice president of the Marque Police Association.
Joshua Human, association member. Richard Garcia, association member.
Keith Bell, Mayor.
Cesar Garcia, city manager.
Randall Aragon, chief of police.
And we have joining us via Zoom. If you guys could all introduce yourselves.
Jennifer Earl, City of Lamarque, admin assistant for Mr. Garcia.
Susie Koo, finance director for City of Lamarque.
Hi, I'm Gus Knable, the city attorney for the City of Lamarque.
Also present, Ms. Patty's in the back of the room but doesn't have a microphone. Ms. Patty Reese is our HR director. And for IT purposes, we have Mr. Kyle Hunter here, who is our IT director. As a brief recap to our last meeting, there were some data points that we requested that you guys could please provide us. And the record will reflect that these items have been presented today. We have begun review prior to us commencing, and we will now turn it over to you all to describe exactly what you presented for us.
All right, Mr. City Manager, I went ahead and took the liberty of passing out all the material that we'll be covering today that is in written form. And I'd like to begin with what we're going to refer to as the market salary comparison. And I want to talk a little bit about how I did this. In our last meeting, we had a long discussion on comparator cities and what would be, correct methodology. And judging from some of the other studies that I did, I went back to my hometown and started doing some factual research and pulling numbers from different sources to try to arrive at a conclusion of some comparable cities with a model kind of outlined with the chief's desire of looking at population and crime rates and so forth. So originally, the first 2 pages represents of this study represents the final comparator cities salary levels based on the recruit and then 4 civil service classifications within the Lamarque Police Association. And so just to give you, the numbers are what they are, just to give you an idea of how this all, what I use as methodology, and this is all over the map. I mean, I reviewed many different studies, and I mean, there are municipalities that hire consulting firms that come in and charge hundreds of thousands of dollars to create the magic comparator. But I just used my experience to put together some methodology that I felt like would be appropriate in this venue. And so I used 2 separate strategies to try to arrive at the basis of the cities you see listed. And the first one was based on population here in the state. So basically looking at statewide cities that whose population was at least 95% of Lamarque's, but not more than 105%. That seemed like a good round number to start with, because it netted over 15 cities. And then you kind of have to tailor these down to make sense. And you'll notice that there's additional information that's provided, and it's just for scope, because I know you guys are interested in a lot of things that would take much longer to make a total comparison. But I knew that there's significant information that was available to me that I could put on this chart that might answer some of your questions. Just size of the city, population, the household income, things of that nature that I know you guys look at and are interested in comparison. So I didn't compare all those things. What I did was I compared the population, I compared the crime rate, and then I kind of went through a two-stage process of cutting down these cities down to a manageable number. And so the first thing I looked at was population. The second, there were a couple of communities that are listed in the first page that I'll phrase them as breakaway communities. They're very affluent neighborhoods that seceded from their cities and chartered themselves, and they're relatively new and there's no data for them. Although they did hit the census, that's about all you can find out about it. But when you look at their average income, they're very affluent communities with, you know, their income level on average in excess of 200,000. So I didn't feel like that was a fair comparison. And so I struck those out just because it made no sense to include them. Then I looked at population deterioration. When you look at some of these cities, if they're losing population over the span of the census, it really doesn't make sense to compare them to cities that are growing. So there was a couple of cities there that were taken out of the fold. Then I looked at, you know, first cut for crime, because when you look at crime rates, it's all over the map. So my first initial cut was based on, you know, a crime that if it had less than 10%, well, then it's not going to be relatively close to Lamar. And so then to even further cut it down, and as you well know, some cities have less and some cities have more, than I used a 50 percentile. So basically, if they didn't have a crime rate that was at least 50% or higher in comparison to Lamar, then it wasn't, you know, it wasn't going to be in our mix here. And then the second aspect, or the second strategy I used, was cities that are in geographic proximity to this town, and then I compared them based on a crime rate. And because in this area, it's more fruitful when you talk about crime rate comparison, I upped that total 65% of Lamar. So you had to have at least 65% of the crime rate of Lamar or higher to be in the cut. And so when you take that and you go to the first page, says round one, and that's basically all the cities that came up when I employed the two strategies. And then when I did the cut, I come down with the final, and that's the next page. And then, like I said, because I know you guys are data driven, you love to have information, it's 2 pages. The first page is really the core of what we're comparing. And then the second page gives you market values or tax values and things that I know you guys are interested in looking at, the tax levy and things like that. But for our purposes, we narrowed really a 2-prong approach, which gives us the cities, the final across the state that I felt reasonably comfortable or comparable enough to use would be Addison, who has a much higher crime rate, Crowley, Live Oak, and Taylor. And each one of those have their own, you know, idiosyncrasies about population and tax rates, and as you well know, but they made the final cut. And then geographic proximity, out of all the cities I looked at, Alvin, Baytown, Galveston, Texas City would meet that criteria based on crime to be compared here. So there's no such thing as perfection, as you well know, in these types of situations. And that's in essence how I ended up with the survey cities that we used. And then we plotted the numbers, and then back to the first 2 pages, when we really get into the numerics of what we made comparisons on. You know, every city is a little different in how they like to look at it. I think they're all valid numbers to consider, but the reality is in the police market, most municipalities strive to be competitive. And everyone has their own definition from a council and mayor of what they think is competitive, but it's reasonable to assume that most cities shoot for that midpoint average, or I'd say the median and or the average. So I put both of them on the page just so that it's you never have enough information. And so it is what it is. And so when I would explain to you the recruit and officer is pretty straightforward. When you get to corporal, that's not so straightforward. It is in the context that you can look at that some of these other cities have corporals, but they're not necessarily promoted corporal as such in a civil service city. And but then when you get into the local market here, that's all we find, with the exception, y'all actually have a promoted rank of corporal. It's a tested position that you have to earn. And then there's an expectation that they're an assistant supervisor and they have additional job tasks. And so when you look at the local market, there is no other comparators from a promotional and name standpoint. There are other cities here that have corporals or did have corporals and they still use the terminology, but I would call it a senior officer position, not a promoted position. So when you look at what the market median or the average is basically what it is here in this city. And so that's why you see zeros there. There's no difference in the local market for corporal pay than there is right here. And y'all have adopted the philosophy to have promoted corporals and have that assistant supervisor capacity. When you go into page 2, that basically compares the sergeant and lieutenant salary. And this is in context as a comparison of the all the cities and then the proximity, which really, we would always argue that the market is in the immediate vicinity of your municipality, where officers who work here can easily drive within a certain distance and go to work for one of the neighboring venues where they know people and have worked and maybe assisted on calls and stuff like that. And so that in essence is really, the gist of what I think y'all should be aware of, but you have some additional information here that get you an idea. When I looked at the population aspect of this, I mean, I could use many other cities whose crime rate were exactly comparable or higher, but their populations and tax base was, significantly different than this venue, and wouldn't make sense in my mind, just using common sense, not any kind of analytical aspect. It just didn't make sense to try to make a comparison of those types of venues. So I'm trying to accomplish as best I could the request of the chiefs to try to get some crime rate consideration in there. As you well know, if you want to look at the finance of policing generally, there's many other avenues that you guys would probably want to look at, from the per capita dollars spent in each community on public safety versus one another, and how many people on the department. This like I said, this is an area of expertise for study for people that have attributes that I don't possess. So the city's always open to look at those, task their own staff if you have enough staff time, or to hire a consultant to look at those things. And I'm sure the mayor and the council members here have done those types of things in the past. So we would just submit to you that we've done a pretty good job of giving you just a kind of a capsule view of that crime issue and population. So whether you use statewide numbers or use the immediate market area, we're going to tell you that the numbers still, in my mind, reflect some needs to improve salary for the police department, to remain competitive, and to also ensure that you have officers that stay with this community and continue to, improve the policing for the community. And I think it's a value to the community. So those are all high-level decisions that the governing body has to take care of. Prior to doing this one, I had also done a survey just on the local cities, and I mean more than what is in the crime comparison, because every city in the immediate vicinity doesn't necessarily have the same crime rate. So when I cut it above to the 65th percentile, that knocked out some of the area cities. But the numbers are not, significantly different when you look at all the cities around your venue and compare them in a market base. So all these numbers are pretty relative. And whether you use a Friendswood or an Alvin or whatever, when you put them all together, I won't say the more the merrier, but the end product still gives you a market trend or a market median for the area. And that's what we would encourage you to use as a barometer of whether or not you need to apply corrective action or not. And at this juncture, I want to answer any questions I can, but like I said, this is just my common sense approach to trying to, create some focus on the study of, comparable cities, but based on that crime rate, population threshold. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to approach it. If not, I mean, a lot of times you gotta look at these things and study them and formulate questions, and we can all discuss it later on. It's just like I said, there's really no depreciable difference.
Where is
I'm sorry.
Crowley?
Crowley is a suburb of Fort Worth in Tarrant County. And I think it actually involves in Tarrant County and in Johnson County. Addison is in, for the most part, Dallas and Collin County, maybe a little bit of Collin County. Taylor is directly east of the city of Austin, probably two municipalities over, as I recall. Live Oak, yeah.
John,
They're kind of all over the state.
I applaud you for putting this together. You did a lot of work and it's everything we kind of asked for. What on the last page, 202, what is a market value? What is that? Is that the value of the property?
That's more the.
When you get, if you use
Tangible property value.
the materials from the state comptroller's website, this is the way they list, and it
That's
deals with the maximum value, and then there's exemptions.
So that's the
usually
value of the
exemption-
property of the city.
Yeah. So it's property within the city limits. that-
Okay,
Or in some cases, it spans over more than one county. So what I had to do was combine the two numbers to get the total number, if you will.
so like that's the property value of Lamarck's 1,800,000,000
Yes.
roughly. Okay,
That's-
yeah.
That would be the assessed value.
looking at this, at first blush, my mind's just jumping back and forth. You got some, if you have the same crime rate, and by the way, when you look at total crime rate on like page 102, you see that like starts out with Crowley on the top, just so everybody's in sync. We generally use a crime rate per 100,000 population. So whatever you look at there, you need to go take the decimal and go two places to the right. So like Lamarck is our violent crime rate, and it's about right. It's 521 violent crimes per 100,000. You see what I'm saying? So put the decimal to the right, two places, because that's the way we deal, John.
Well,
It's right, but I'm saying
Yeah.
we talking the same. We got to be on the same song sheet. We work with crime on our crime stats nationally.
Right.
It's per 100,000 population. So I just want, but what I want to say is, looking at all these, some are like Taylor, well, not Taylor, like Addison. It's 19,000 population. Of course, their crime rate is high, right? But they're 4.3 square miles. We're 14 roughly. So, when you look at that, you got a plus and a minus, but looking at this Taylor, to me, if you count everything, I know the crime rate's not the same as Lamarck. There's a lot of similar factors, but when you look at the pay, it's about the same as ours. In fact, we're a little bit higher when you look at the front page. So you're not going to have one that syncs up with Lamarck's total,
Correct.
Square miles, crime rate, poverty level, but that's the closest to me is Taylor. And I'm not a scientist on this, but just at first blush, I'm trying to get one that meets kind of our criteria. And I think to me, unless Caesar or the mayor, that's a pretty close match on a lot of indicators. Because look, Crowley at the top, 19,000. Their per capita income is about ours, but their poverty line is we're 15 almost 16% below the they're only 8, so they're a little richer city than us, and their household income is 77,000. Ours is only 54. So I'm trying to get the ones that match us pretty close. I'd say Taylor, and then that's the closest to me in my mind. I don't know.
But Chief, they're, like I said, it's all over the map.
Yeah,
When it comes down to,
it's you're not going to find an exact duplicate.
As you're a trained professional and manager of police services, I'm sure you've got to really drill down
Right.
into the data. Anytime you select a group of comparators, you got to do that qualification
Yeah.
process to get the apples to apples.
Right.
And that's why I'm saying, based on looking at all this, the comparator cities for y'all is going to be in your immediate vicinity. They have to deal with the same types of crime issues that you do,
Yeah.
maybe not to the degree that you do. When you look at the household income,
Mhm.
both for the household and the average, and what I didn't put in here is the unemployment rate. But there's many different aspects of
Mhm.
this that really truly paint a financial picture within a venue. And so you have to look at all the dollars spent, I'm afraid. And so that's not really what I was geared up to do, because if you take every single police budget and you determine the total number, you may have a higher crime rate than a venue, but
Right.
your citizenry and your governmental body may have dedicated more resources to tackle that problem than another venue. Without some type of a fact-based comparison, we're shooting all over the map when we're throwing darts at the dartboard. We want to hit the bullseye, and that's why this community relies on you for your expertise to give the city manager,
Right.
mayor, and council the benefit of your knowledge. We're just trying to establish something that makes
I think the only thing missing.
comply with things you wanted, and like I said, it's so difficult.
Mhm.
We just kind of resort back to the local venue here in the cities that you know more about
Yeah.
than I do.
This is the best analysis I've seen, because the only thing missing,
Yeah.
I know you did a lot, is the budget, the city's budget for like Live Oak. I know ours is about 14 million there. I wonder what Live Oak and theirs would be, the total budget, because ours is 14 and the PD's is 5.5 million
Right.
roughly. I just
Well,
wonder.
Every municipality's governmental body is going to set the prioritization of the money that's spent in that community.
Mhm.
And I would submit in some communities, there may be more parks and more libraries than there are in this one. And so that outlay represents,
Mhm.
I think the genuine dollars spent on public safety compared to the genuine
Right.
dollars spent on public safety is the only barometer, and staffing and the
Yeah.
crime rate, because it may be a testament to your management and these guys' work that you're keeping the crime level at what it is.
Right.
If you compare their work model to another venue who has more or less, you may find these guys are working tremendously hard in comparison to their counterparts. But that's something I'm not qualified to talk about right now, because I haven't compiled all that data. I mean, I've seen over my career in policing of 38 years, I've seen more than one venue study all the things you're talking about. In fact, in Fort Worth, Texas, they spent $1 million to study every single aspect at one point in time. And it was money they budgeted over a 3-year time frame, because they wanted to make sure that their crime control prevention district was hitting the mark and trying to be totally transparent with the citizens who had to vote on these things. And they were able to, prove up that money was going in and they were doing a great job. And I mean, they studied everything from what would be the appropriate work model to staffing levels to the correct number of officers per thousand of population, just a myriad of things that they use that CCPE money for, which you don't have right now. But you might want to look at it in the future, but you know, they tailored in a program using to maximize the efficiency of their dollars. And that's just one I personally know about. I even have a copy of it. It's like 6 or 8 volumes this wide. And it was just, they studied it. Sometimes good old fashioned common sense always dictates. And I think you can use a lot of study to come out with the answer you already know in your heart is the right approach. And like I said, every elected official, I think, would love to have polling on everything they could possibly have to try to make sure they're making the right decisions. But sometimes we have to fly by the seat of our pants because it's economic. And so I appreciate your comments. I think that it would benefit the department immensely to be able to, even if you did it on your own with your own resources and didn't to look at those types of things, because you know the citizens here need to, they have the same needs as other citizens. And I'm just saying, I think that those are all valid considerations, and I think you know that from your experience. But there are some venues, I'm sure you know that, you know, Texas Chiefs Association, different venues that people can be members of that are, you know, gatherings of professionals that offer very low, you know, cost services, you know, where maybe you just pay for, you know, the I guess the add-on cost, but not the skill and the hours and things like that. So you can get some of these questions, you know, answered with some of their studies. But it always takes someone compiling all that data and put it together. And like I said, that's where your expertise is achieved, and really identify those areas that are pertinent. You know, and in my mind, it's transparency, so the citizens know exactly what needs to be done in their city to make it a safer city. That's, you know, and I applaud you that is your job, you know. But it still, you know, comes back to the fact that, you know, we can study and study and study.
Yeah, no.
We can hone it in.
This is the closest I've seen to having a full comparison, you know, all nuts and bolts.
I wish I had, I mean, I'm really interested in these types of things. I wish I had more time and capability to do it, but as you well know, some of the data is dated. Nowadays, it's, you know, with the switch over to NIBRS, there's a lot of cities that are not reporting like they want to. And then with the COVID epidemic, that is, you know, it's very hard to get applicable numbers today to do those kinds of studies because of, you know, the 2-year lag, if you will. Anybody else have any questions?
Do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Other than what the budget would be for the whole city, that would be interesting. I'll look it up myself.
This has nothing to do with our negotiations today. I'm just curious if you would be able to, if we could possibly find a way to look at how much we invest in our police department and somehow divide that by our population. I think that much of what we do here moving forward, we have to educate the public.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation going out into our community. I think we need to make sure that we, in every way possible, inform and educate. I'd be curious to see that. That's not a bear on the negotiations this, you know, today or even this period. But I think our citizens need to know that.
Maybe one of the ways that I can, you know, I have seen studies like this in the past, and I think I probably have a couple of copies now. Understand they'll be dated from whatever time they were, but it might be a blueprint, if you will, for your professional staff here to just queue up on a few things that some other municipality may have done, and emulate it, if you will. I don't think we have to recreate the wheel all the time. I think a lot of times, but there's a general reluctance sometimes to ask another city for a copy of something because, you're afraid they'll say, well, y'all got taxpayer dollars to spend and do that as well. But sometimes we can learn from one another. And I'm sure that's why you guys leverage it, different types of, meetings and things. But I do know of a couple off the top of my head, and I'll make a note, see if I can,
It's just, again, just additional information to try to find a way to educate our public. I will say this, so this is definitely well put together, well thought out. And you always bring to these negotiations things that are well put together, well thought out. So I appreciate this. This is going to educate our city in more ways than we probably would know. Secondly, I think it's fair. I think it's fair because you have taken two cities from the Dallas-Fort Worth area to two of our larger cities in Texas, two suburbs, if you will. And it looks like you've taken two suburbs from the San Antonio, Austin area, city of our size, two of the largest cities in our state. And we are, in essence, a suburb of Houston. So I think it's fair. I like it. That's all.
based on the metropolitan proximity, I think this city has to deal and contend with issues that other smaller cities or similar sized cities in different venues don't have to deal with. And so it's always a good idea to try to measure that up because when you look at some of the larger cities, they also have things that they have to take into consideration. Every aspect of economic development, public housing, public health that Lamarck may not have to do to the degree because you have the county resources. But so like I said, it's got to be tailored, in my humble opinion, to the venue and get those true apples to apples comparisons. And I think it's always valuable for the citizens of any community to know, in essence, everyone's concerned about their tax dollars. And if you know that it's being effectively and efficiently used for the maximum performance, then that's what I want to know, the taxpayer. And I'm sure that's true with you as well. So I think those are the types of things that we look at. But and this doesn't have to be, the last we talked about. I'm certainly available. If you come up with an idea, we're always interested in working with the city any way we can. I tell you, these guys work for you every day, and their job is to go out and serve the citizenry. So I think frequently, and Mayor, you well know, sometimes bringing the guys who actually do the labor and where the rubber meets the road is always beneficial to find out, when you're studying how to do things more efficiently. So.
Mayor, that can I ask him, Mayor, what you're talking about would be to divide into the city's population. Divide the city's population into the budget of PD, and then you get
Justify the cost per
yeah,
capita.
we got $292 per.
How much is it?
Ours is, if you take our population, which is stated here, 18,861, divided into 5.5 million, which is our budget, PD's budget, we got $292. So per resident. That'd be good. I've seen that. In fact, ICMA has that in their manuals. You can look at it.
I think that'd be really good to compare, because I suspect, and I don't know, guys. I'm just-
That tells you good.
I suspect that we probably don't afford it.
I would agree with you. Like I said, a lot of times when you do these comparisons, you have to know what the particular venue actually does budgetarily. Sometimes someone of your own budget department has to look at their budget and make that comparison because, like I said, the biggest one I know of in police work is when all your police equipment is acquired by another branch of the city. Even though the chief may have some costing experience that goes into it, the money in the budget is actually put in their budget, not the police budget. So when you look at all that equipment, cars and stuff like that, it has to be added back into the budget to get a true comparison. And many of the venues that y'all would probably select still use what I consider to be the mindset of an equipment services division that all equipment is best to be acquired and serviced by one branch of the city and not the police department per se. And so fire departments tend to do that on their own initiative, whereas police departments tend to be managed by equipment services for all their, what I would consider to be capital equipment. Fire is so much different because it has, when you buy a fire truck, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a very specialized, whereas buying a Crown Victoria Ford to make a patrol car, you know, or whatever that's a little bit different. So
When you can get them.
I'm sorry?
When
Yes,
you
sir.
can get.
Yes, sir. Or whatever denomination is building a police package today, you know.
We're experiencing some supply chain issues with that as well. I have one minor question, only because it kind of just stood out because it's right below us on the page 1 of the round 1 comparison. Renham, yearly close to population, slightly below on area. Like we've mentioned, Lamarque is a unicorn, if you will, but there's not very many cities that are similar, probably nationally, that show that. And obviously, comparison of what you did is great. I'm curious why Brenham wasn't selected as a comparison, even though their crime rate is significantly lower. There's so many other similarities. For example, below poverty line, the per capita income, the household income, the area mileage. There's so many, the density. There's so many similarities, including the total population. I was wondering why it may not have been used as a comp, and would you consider presenting that as a comp?
Well, it wouldn't be difficult to pull the numbers. It's just, I did not feel like that the chief would think their crime rate was comparable. So I said it at the 50th percentile level. And that was, you know, if I'd have said it any higher, then you'd only have one city, which is Addison.
Right.
And if I did that, you know,
It's not a comparison.
well, it's not, you know, the crime rate is like at 61 compared to y'all, but you know, the thing is, it's a community that has a better tax base, I'll put it like that.
Okay.
More commercial taxpayers maybe.
Oh, yeah. They got
So they're, you know,
5 times their tax bill.
so, you know, when a venue of a larger population and maybe even a larger land mass and more business communities, all those things, you got to get down into real poor separation to get, because it's going to get down to how many dollars that a venue spends on a certain priority, if you will, or you cannot, or it's going to be skewed. You know, in my humble opinion, it'll be skewed.
Oh, no.
And
I
that's
was just
why
curious.
having Brendan on there or not wouldn't bother me in the least. It's just that I had to make a cut point, and I was thinking in the back of my mind the whole time what the chief would be saying. Well, if it was, you know, it's in that 45th percentile, 40 percentile, I said, well, why not 50? Well, it just kind of common sense said, let's make it at least 50% or cut them from the roll. You know, if we broaden and this where it's all over, I've done other studies in other cities where they wanted to look at, and even the council articulate, well, we'd like to see everybody that's got a population within, you know, 15,000 plus or minus. And that's just, you know, people sticking their heads together and saying, let's look at this. And I've seen councils come up with, you know, when you meet with other counterparts at some of your area meetings, things like that, they come up with, I like to see what this city does, that city does, just because they hear things of things that they try and strategies that they employ. So like I said, I think whatever criteria that you set is gonna net you a number of comparators. And then when you start going down, you might find out that they are or they're not. And so like I said, with Brennan particularly, I mean, I could find other cities that are pretty close to us, but a lot of them do not have to deal with the crime rate or crime issues that I consider this to be a metropolitan area that has metropolitan growing pain. And, you know, it may not be this city, it may be people coming from other area cities into venue to commit crime. It may not be your citizen, so you have to deal with the whole, you got 45 running through the middle of your venue here that is, as the chief will tell you, is easy access or escape route, if you will. So there's lots of things that go into that consideration, but with all that said, I still would tell you that comparative situation, when you look at per capita incomes and crime rates and stuff like that, your geographic proximity or those folks that are dealing with the same types of situations you have to. So it's probably going to produce the best. But on a statewide basis, you look at, there's cities all over the state. So it's just however you guys want to approach it.
Quick question, just for the sake of conversation, although your entire budget isn't derived to police officers, correct? The 5.5 you mentioned, if that's the case, you said the current rate is 292. So, and you derive that number by simply taking your current police budget divided by 18,000.
18,861, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just doing some notes here just to kind of correlate that. So I took the same just basic numbers and I said the average full-time employee works 2,080 hours a year. Right. And if we work, and there's 39 officers, authorized officers. So we took that number, just did some simple math. Man, here's probably my notes. I pretty much did. I took 2080, multiplied it by what it looks like for $1 increase, just for the sake of conversation, to see what the number would be. I took that and equates to $81,120 of increased budget for the year, or a per capita rate of an increase of $4.30 per capita. I'm doing that for the sake of just putting numbers to it. When you asked about numbers per capita, what that looks like. So to go from 292, it would literally rise to 296.30 if you went $1. And again, I did this so you can't see my notes, obviously. I went $1, $2, $3, what that would look like.
What would the $1 be for?
If each sworn officer received a $1 per hour increase, right? Just for the sake of conversation, not that we're going to percentages, or I just want to see what it looks like. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to turn and go to chief, especially this year when we have less money. He's going to have less money in his budget. More likely, I got to say, all right, chief, guess what? You got to cut your salary. Let's say for the sake of conversation, we decide to put $1. You got to cut your budget from by $81,120 somewhere else to give them $1, right? Let's look at $2. It equates to, and what it equates to is per officer is essentially it's an amount of either 2,080 more in base pay, 4,160 more in base pay, or at $3 per hour, right, is $6,240 more in base pay. If you take the number of, let's just say minimum officer, just for the sake of math, that's shown on page 1 of 2 here, it says 54,109. If you went to a $1 per hour raise, that would equate to 54,109 plus 2,080. So whatever that math is, so 56,189. So I wanted to look at that because this year over every year, we have the challenge that we need to cut somewhere. Okay, it has to come from somewhere. Whether it all comes out of police or comes from other places, we are cutting jobs. Okay, we are cutting jobs. Where, I don't know, but we got to figure it out. Either cut jobs, cut expenses somewhere, because like I mentioned last time we met, the pie is not getting anything. So that's the stark reality. So if indeed we go at $1, $2, $3, $7, whatever we end up the number being, just for the sake of math for this first year, whether you look at it percentages or look at it dollars, I'm trying to equate to what that's going to cost. So if we go to $2 per sworn officer per hour increase, that equates to $162,240 that you would have to cut from your budget. $3, it's $243,360 to cut from the budget. And incrementally, the increases are per capita increases. So $4.30 per capita, $860 per capita, or $12.90 per capita. I stopped at $3 because my notepad is only so big. But as you can see, we can just equate this down the line. The reason why I did that is because in comparison to what you have here, once we look at these comparisons, then what do we know what to propose, right? What is it you're going to ultimately propose? And that's obviously staying at 39 officers, not hopefully the fact that we're going to recruit more officers. And I understand we have, how many coming through, Ms. Patty, for the next exam? 7? 8, excellent. So, and I applaud you guys because obviously you're recruiting folks. Hopefully they stick, they pass, and they become qualifiable candidates. But we got to keep pushing like that issue. I just, for the sake of, and I'm sure you understand, respective, my perspective is, I have to say, what's it going to cost us, right? At the end of the day, with all due respect, yes, you're people, yes, you're human beings, yes, your bodies, but what is that going to cost us per body, per person, and how do we relate that to the residents to say, the officers will now cost you an additional $4.30 per year if you give them $1 raise. It'll cost you an additional, it'll $8.60 per year per person in the city. So if I have a household of 5, then I'm taking my 5 times that $8.60, and that's how much more it's going to cost per officer for my household in my case to do that if we do it in this manner, right? If it's a per capita breakdown. Obviously, people aren't taxed per capita, but just to put into relations to what it's going to, what that correlates to. So this is great information. Lots to chew on. I only asked about Brenham because one, I don't know all the areas around it. I didn't know if that was a reasonable comp or not, or a skewed comp where it could be out of left field comp. Whenever you do comparisons like this, I love that you did the comps of different areas. And I also love that you did the local, because let's be honest, folks are going to be recruited to probably go locally unless they're going to uproot their families and go to an Addison or a Crowley, right? They're probably going to stay within the general vicinity. So the breakdown that you gave of all the cities around us is also comparative. That to me was really, really valuable as well, to see what some of these cities are paying. I mean, I'm surprised everybody's not jumping ship and going to Baytown. And I'm being honest with you. I don't know why. I don't know why. This is where I say it's completely thankless, right? Why, looking at this, I'm sure Baytown has no problem recruiting officers, right? Right? Just based on the fact that they pay well. And if I had to guess, their crime rate's probably lower. And got a good tax base, probably got good support. Just going off of this, comparison.
Crime rate's high.
Is it? Yeah, it is 38.9.
It's pretty, but the tax base is so much.
Well, the tax base is higher, but the tax rate is way higher. But in comparison to that, that's why they can afford to pay.
Yeah.
Don't be a sergeant over there.
Man,
I mean, with all due respect to you guys, I have to point that out. Again, this is not a problem that came overnight. Okay? I'm shocked at this. I'm really shocked at how we got to this rate.
But it's fair to say that you gentlemen on your side of the table are the ones that got to, run the city, if you will. And that's you, the city manager. You got to make the recommendations, and the mayor and the council got to make they're the board of directors, if you will. And so, we can look at all kinds of comparisons, but then it remains with you. You got hired to get the job done. So that's where sometimes it's a very painful process. You're going to, I'm sure, tell people. Sometimes you got to size in the belt, but if you just look at municipalities generally, citizenry want the same types of services in all the cities. But then again, services cost money, you have to pay for it. So it's a balancing act, as you well know and are keenly aware of. And when you're dealing with, I would say, high priority issues to taxpayers that deal with the public safety and the roads, and things that they deal with day in and day out. It's a tough job of prioritization, spending money, but when you look at tax rates, and budgets and things like that, that's, that's why it's a pursuit that you're trying to advance in this particular city, that's for sure. It's definitely a science, without a doubt.
That's why that explains all the extra gray hairs. I'll ask this separate from this. I'm just curious from your perspective because we don't often get a chance to have this type of dialogue and completely separate from any negotiations or anything else, right? To me, I'll remove my hat as either mediator or city manager for a second. I look at the page, it's not numbered, but it says 2022 salary survey comparative city selection round 1, and it shows all the cities in our geographic proximity. And I wanted just to highlight that, and I'm curious, okay, and you don't have to have an answer for this necessarily. There's a lot of different factors that are that show this the way it is. My question is for what I look for, we had a 46.64 total crime for 1,000. I know you said it for 100,000, but
Right.
4.64% or 46.64 is the rate.
Yes, yeah.
And then I look at all the other cities on there. Money aside, guys, and I don't know that you have the answer, right? Someone's always got to be best, someone's always got to be the worst, right? My question is how do we reduce that number? And I don't know that you have the answer.
Primary?
Yeah. I mean, we're the next closest city to us is Galveston, and I feel that's probably an unfair comparison, being that they're a tourist destination. Chances are most of their crime probably from
Which
by
is the one you're talking about?
Well, Galveston.
Oh,
Look at theirs. Theirs is 37.64.
Yeah.
So in fairness to them, yeah, the rate's higher, but arguably how much of that is being by folks that are visiting the island versus not, right? So to me, that one's kind of skewed. The next really closest one are Alvin and Texas City. Yes, our density is different, and yes, all that is just different, but I struggle with how is it that, what can we do to drastically drop that, money aside? I'm not talking about adding officers. I mean, obviously we need to add officers. We know that, and we know once we get our study, it's probably gonna say that we have to have 10 officers, who knows? And I know recruitment's a problem. I mean, obviously it's a prevalent problem. Why would somebody want to come here with a higher crime rate? It probably relates to more work, right? Less pay. It just, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for folks to want to come here or stay here. So I commend all of you for doing so, because I see a number of cities that are very near proximity that you guys could all jump to very easily. So while you're here, God bless you. And anybody ever questions that, it's just different. But I ask you, one thing that I hope, however long my tenure is, or however long I end up living in the city, is that's the one thing that I look at for the sake of the residents. What can we all collectively do to drive that down? And I know it's a combination of it's a combination of getting more officers, it's a combination of getting more pay, a combination of cleaning up our streets and making the Marque a better place to live, and so on and so forth. So many things. Anybody has the answer to that?
We did, and you all know, we all know, we got the Marque Safe City Initiative, which was zeroed in on everything the city manager is saying. It's got 5 major goals, and it's got crime analysts, it's got, the grant people we're looking at, got dealing with the RCC, Resource and Crisis Center. There's all kinds of stuff in there. You all seen it, but it's in there. It's strategies are in there. So we really got, that's what the mayor wanted, bring our crime rate down, make us a safer city in Texas, but it's got a lot of moving parts. It's not just officers, numbers. It's strategies, adding this, adding that, crime analyst.
That's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
to be honest.
It's
I mean, that's it.
yeah, it's not just one thing to do and it's gonna, be the magic bullet. You got-
Man, I commend all of
Yeah.
All these guys working together in a multi-pronged strategy, is
Mhm.
what it's gonna take. And, just judging from my limited contact with Lamar for almost 2 years now, you have a new chief that is trying to roll back the clock by getting a community policing effort started that once was here but has gone.
Back.
And I'll tell you, having the eyes and ears of the citizenry of the city working for this chief to alert them to crime, to alert them to intelligence issues is going to be a commodity that is priceless to reduce the crime. These guys can go to every single call that comes across the radio, and that may or may not have any impact on prevention. And
Can I ask you, is it getting hard to say, especially depending on the time frame, but is it getting better?
The crime.
Yeah, or is it getting worse?
So in the Marque, I'm sure in every city across the board, I mean, all really depends on the season as well. It always slows down a little bit in the winter time, and summertime it picks up a little lot. I mean, as far as our shootings, homicides and stuff, I think it's pretty on par.
So no real change. Sorry, I'm not trying to sidetrack from what we're talking about. That's just glaring.
Cesar, let me just explain in reference to, the city of Lamarck and the crime that goes on. As he was saying, it's kind of like seasonal. Really what it is it's usually a wave. Okay. You're gonna have your upticks, you're gonna have your downticks, you're gonna have your low tide, your high tide. There is criminal elements that are responsible for our shootings, and they're all tied to gang activity, drug activity. Okay. The bottom line is today we could be sitting here and having a conversation and we hadn't had a shooting in 6 months. Tomorrow, these officers could be out there working 5 shootings. And, the next 3 months dealing with a shooting every week. There's no way for us as a group or a profession to be able to tell you that we're bringing it down, because just because there's a lull doesn't mean the problem has been solved. What solves those problems is community backing, city backing, and working hand in hand with the officers that are out there serving the community. If we have those things going on and the support of the community, supporting the efforts that we're making towards trying to curtail the criminal activity that's responsible for those things, then you're more than likely going to see a decline. I would love to be able to sit at this table and tell you that we could solve your crime tomorrow. The bottom line is anybody that sits at this table and tells you that is lying to your face. We do the best job we can. The officers are talented. They're very professional. And when they're allowed to get out there and do their job and do it the way that it needs to be done, professionally, but hardlined, okay, you will see a difference in your crime stats. That's my answer to that. I can't tell you, hey, this is the magic button that's going to fix it all, because there ain't one.
I've had the opportunity to listen to several chiefs and community-driven policing cities talk about how they leverage their crime downward trend. And I'll tell you, the one thing that I saw consistent in many of these venues is the citizens help them, the police department, take back their community. And they did so by being the eyes and ears and intelligence, the citizen control group. There's so many different community-based or community-oriented opportunities that if someone can leverage it takes personnel. I mean, right now you have police officers that are, for the most part, going call to call taking reports on things that have already happened. We talk about the particular staffing model for patrol has got to include the opportunity for them to go out and seek out and search and work on crime. And if you're just going call to call, then that's the lion's share of what you do.
Right.
And so with the grant that you put in for, I'm assuming that the chief's going to try to leverage these new folks in here to work in the community, because it's fair to say that you can't afford enough police officers to control crime today. It just, it's impossible.
Mhm.
It's going to take a community involvement, in my humble opinion, managed by the police department, to narrow in on the things that, every citizen wants to have a safe community. I think that's true. But, it's going to be up to the chief to get more community involvement and to build that trust. I mean, every aspect of this,
Mhm.
works to the benefit of lowering the crime rate. But, and then too, I'd urge you to look at everybody's numbers with a fine tooth comb, because as the chief will tell you, when you look at violent crime versus property crime, a lot of these municipalities, crime is driven by petty crime, like gas drive-off, for instance. Why it's a part one crime, I can't tell you, but it is. And it's detrimental because they're, I've seen this problem in many cities where the solution is an ordinance that requires you to pay before you pump your gas, but no one will do that. And the reason they won't do that is because then every business community member that runs gas in the community is going to come down and park themselves at the city council and complain that it's devastating to their ability to compete with someone who doesn't. But the reality is, if you could stop all those crimes by introducing pay before you pump, then you wouldn't have that crime rate. And so some of these cities have taken upon themselves, and I'll be honest with you, they don't report those. What they do, they work with the different gas venues. They have such great drive-offs. They tell them, call in and report yourself once a month. And, it's mind-boggling how different communities have to deal with this, but you really have to look at the validity of the numbers reported. And, you may be reporting everything exactly 100% correct in the way it was intended to be done. And other venues have, cut off that because it's really not a definitive and or an active deflection of your crime rate if all the grass drives off.
Right.
Would you disagree?
Yeah, I think I had a couple of cities like you're talking about. We could not get them to go with, pay before you pump. And they claimed to me, it was weird, that people spend money when they go inside and they don't want to do that. But most of our pumps are, you got to put a credit card in. So we don't, ours is Walmart. I mean, every shoplifting is a theft. It could be 25 cents. But let me just say this, we're moving ahead. You mentioned it, John, about community policing effort. I have never talked to a citizen that said, please stop that. They usually tell me and my officers, we love it, we want more of it.
Right.
And we're on our fourth, coming up July 12th, with our fourth community watch / community policing officer. It's going to be on Mega Pay. We have had 4 in less than 6 months. We're going to have a bunch more, and that's going to do something. But it takes time to bring crime rates down. You don't have it; it doesn't happen overnight. We were there once before. We're going to get back to it. The Lamarck, as the mayor walked out, but Caesar had asked mayor about crime rates, and I said the Lamarck Safe City Initiative is the magic bullet for right now. I mean, you wanted it, we got it, and when I just want to be sure that everybody understands this. Susie's there, that's my budget lady, our budget lady. In that Lamarck Safe City Initiative, it states what we need to fix this problem. And the council approved this thing. It's not just Randall Aragon. So if it says we need whatever, Susie, the council, they approved it. It's not just, I didn't I didn't fly by the seat of my pants on the thing. So everything in there that we wanted, RCC, the crime analyst, the grant, we're getting it. And that's why I'm glad we got it, Mayor, because I don't have to jump through hoops to get these items. You know, I know one thing in there is the social worker. I'm really wore out about that whole thing because it went from, you know, working for me to working with the city manager. I don't know where we're at on it. I'm not even gonna go there unless the city manager orders me. But the thing is, we got to fix this problem and we got a solution. It's what you've set up, the Lamarck Safe City Initiative. So guys, if you would, when you have a chance, look at it. I know you probably looked at it. It states specifically what we need to fix this, John. It's not just, you know, I didn't dream this up. We've had 10 to 15 subject matter experts come in and say, we need to do this, and the council approved it, and I'm not just kidding. So we got to make sure we get there on that, okay? And it talks about things for the officers too in there. Okay, all right. I'm on my soapbox, I'm getting off, okay?
Well, and I'll just tell you that I know there's no one on this side of the table that doesn't want to help you work on these issues and improve them.
Yeah.
It's a community effort. These guys, you know, when you talk about, and I'll just say it's loyalty. I mean, when you go to work for a venue, you create a certain amount of loyalty. As long as you can pay me enough money for me to make a living and keep up with my family, I'm going to try to stay here. But when the police market salaries wise gets to a point where it incents someone to go someplace else, that's when you have a problem. So that's part of the reason that we're here, is to talk about a professional police department made up of people who are highly trained and paid appropriately to keep that loyalty here at home. Now, the mayor, having been one, knows that you don't do the you know, jobs of public safety personnel because you want to be rich. You know, that's never the number one criteria. When you look at, you dwell down from a psychological standpoint, why people do things. I mean, pay is lower down, but it's a have to. We all got to have it. And so I think the city has got to be cognizant to maintain that professionally trained staff that doesn't constantly rotate. It's a juggling act, as we well know, but by the same token, I think you need to become skilled, benchmark, you know, survey, you know, routinely, just to always have your fingers on the pulse, and then listen to these guys when they want to give you input about how best to resolve some of the problems, because they're not greedy. Okay, I'm going to make that statement. They're not greedy. You know, if they were, they wouldn't be working here. You well know. I mean, some of your officers have college degrees and they could be working in corporate America. You know, but they're driven to do this, and they're driven to want to help their fellow, you know, citizens, man, and they love this pursuit. And that's kind of, I think, the bottom line here. You know, you guys have to juggle the balls, if you will, and try to find out how many balls you can juggle, and how many, you know, the more the merrier. And like I said, the more money you get, the better off you are. But that's a delicate balance. It's a balance with, you know, the transparency of making sure citizens know where their dollars go. But I feel confident that your citizenry expect a certain level of public safety and are willing to pay a reasonable amount for an efficient police department. And that's where you guys got to work, you know, work your magic, if you will, especially from a budgetary standpoint. But, you know, we can talk about crime rate, honestly, until the cows come home, because everybody's got an opinion on it. But the bottom line is, I think you have achieved is, you know, working diligently to try to get the resources, and then even some grants and so forth to try to get back on track, because obviously you have to attack crime. You have to beat it. That's just the fact of life. So, but I'd like to go ahead and move on and give you some of the practical things we want to talk to you about if you guys are ready to move. You already have copies in front of you. I'll just try to be brief. You know, no one expects that the answer is yes today. You know, we're here to prove it to you, and we're willing to work with you. But basically, as we told you previously, we wanted to try to pursue a multi-year contract, a 3-year contract. And as a beginning point, we feel like the police market is going to move here about 15% over the next 3 years. And of course, we'd love to target that. That's why we put it on paper. It's all relative to everything, but we canvass the members of the organization. We've taken their requests and pooled them into a list of priorities. And so these are the things that we're going to put forth to you that are important to our members and that they'd like to see consideration. And first, obviously, is the pay raise. Then when you're talking about comparability with the police market, there's trends in the police pay market that we want to be cognizant of and want to make recommendations to. And these, for a couple of you in the room, you will have heard these before because we've been here before. But we think that it just makes sense to talk about, keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, in the context that the police officers and firefighters are paid additional monies for their specialties that they've learned how to do and they become proficient in. And many of the comparable cities that we use have this type of a pay practice. We want to introduce it to you. And basically, just as housekeeping, we'll try to give you something in writing. We'll try to identify the article of the current contract language that it is. We'll try to, place it as it is written, and then where we want to supplement or change things, we'll, you have the benefit of having some color and some not color because it'll make some changes last night. But so blue and underline and italic is new and or change of language from our standpoint. And if we strike something out, we typically try to do that with red and a strikeout. But so we want you to know that we're making a recommendation that we add a section to the agreement, and we'd have to renumber, but basically it would create opportunities for the pay of specialty training that these officers go out and obtain. And there's no magic here. These are just, kind of the high points, if you will, of the TCOL additional specialty pay measurements that are, where you get certificates for learning these things. Some are very involved and some are, like drug recognition expert, for instance. I mean, it requires ongoing certifications. It requires a multitude of training. It's not as easy as some. So that's why you'll see that we place a little bit higher value on that. Also, within the current language, we have assignments pay, and looking at, and this was discussed last year, and we wanted to try to go and unilaterally make these assignments pay the same. Whereas last year, the chief put a very high priority on the community-oriented policing. And I'm assuming he was about to make some selection. You really want to make sure that some folks are motivated to, but we'd like to, offer that all the assignments pay be $300 a month. And I will point out that special response team is in the current contract $200 a month, but apparently I didn't identify this in blue like I should have, and so I draw that to the point. Right now, community-oriented policing is $300 a month, but all the other assignments are $200 a month. And we would suggest that they all need to be $300. And then we're adding one that didn't make the cut list last contract negotiation, which is action reconstruction team, which is a callback responsibility as well, and requires special training. So that was, the city agreed with us last year and tried to add some things, and we just want to try to build on that if possible. And then also, and with regards to this, same, one of the pages didn't print out correctly, so I had to print it out last night. I didn't have access to color printer, so the single page that really should be part of Article 11 of their salaries is we're requesting an increase in the amount of monthly pay for the different certifications. And although it's, you can see where I've struck out the current existing language and then added underlined, even though it's all one color. It's adding $25 to the intermediate certificate pay and $50 each to the advanced and then master's certificate. It's all pretty straightforward, but does anybody have any questions about any of those issues? One of the other proposals we want to give to you in written form here. Our officers have really brought it to everyone's attention that they're using their own personal telephone to further their business pursuit here. And they also pointed out some of the local other venues here are paying a cell phone stipend or the city's furnishing with the cell phone for everyone. I think it goes without saying that, every police officer can use that cell phone, whether it be calling, complainants as they roll to their call or helping citizens with everything from, records, to other services. So I think it's a fact that it goes on. So we wanted to offer up, and it made sense to put it in Article 25, which is, safety and equipment, where we'd like to introduce the idea of each officer receiving a cell phone stipend of $85 a month so that they use their personal phone, for the city's business for the most part. You do furnish a few phones right now, I think, as I understand it, but basically the reality is everyone on this department uses their cell phone.
So I think that you all would be opposed if we decided to purchase cell phones for each of the officers.
Yeah, so I put it or there, but then we thought, well, you're gonna want to, introduce that concept yourself, and you want to study the efficiency of what made
We
the
have
best
experience.
economic.
We have experience with some of our personnel, not officers, but some of our personnel, we had paid them over the years. Our former city manager, in fact, stipends. And then when it's time to get the information off of those phones, we have issues. So Cesar is the first city manager, I think, that we've issued a cell phone to, and I think Kyle likes, that's probably a better arrangement for you to be able to control the information, right?
Yeah, and me and Mr. Garcia are developing a communication policy that will speak to cell phone stipends and what is expected, what apps will be used if a stipend given citywide.
We're looking at doing that, not just for police, but just citywide.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with you guys. We're just trying to see.
Well, we're already working on it.
And I'm sure you're gonna, maximize your input from your legal department, because there's very special consideration when you talk about many of the municipal venues have introduced software that they put on, whether it's a personal phone or whether it's a city phone, where they automatically download and capture the information that is of interest to you to fulfill your ministerial duties for the Open Records Act. So that's kind of all over the map, but I'm sure Gus can make sure that you guys know what you need to know, but that is a consideration this day and age. You don't want to have to spend a lot of staff time redacting information, or going through information that you didn't capture properly. And it takes a lot of staff time. So I'd certainly submit that to you as one of the considerations. Sounds like you guys are already looking at it anyway. Something that we wanted to bring to your attention, and we think it makes sense, but by the same token, it's already in the contract to some degree with the management of the chief, but we think it might be a good idea to look at a take-home car program for all the police officers. Something, especially if we're in a 3-year multi-year contract to be phased in, but that could also create a better response, in an emergency situation. Also, using a little gas back and forth might be some additional economic incentive. And, as you guys look at things like this, I'm sure the chief can tell you studies he's seen before, but most cities will typically get into a 3-year rotation where they buy vehicles, so many vehicles each year, because having a take-home car program typically yield a better state of maintenance, if you will, or upkeep of the vehicle, because when it's yours to drive back and forth, it's totally, you're gonna have to worry about 1 or 2 other people driving the vehicle all the time and not doing the thing that you do. And by keeping it clean, keeping it mechanically sound, I think, there's many of the venues that do this that repeatedly get asked for their models, and they put it down. They're easy to come by, but like I said, it is a cost-effective and efficient way to get a steady replacement. But it's something that we'd like for y'all to take a look at, and might be something that we can modify in the current agreement and implement over a period of time. But you already have, the chief already has certain capabilities for take home vehicles. And I'm assuming, and that's the assumption on my part, that it's limited now to people who probably reside in the city or have an emergency response capability. But
I'm curious, Mr. Curtin, if you have the data or not. Of our 39 sworn officers, how many live within the city?
I'd have to defer to these guys to tell me that, or the chief.
7.
Company.
And do all 7 of those have to take home vehicles?
They do, and the way the rule is, if they live in the city, they can have a take home if it's available. So if we ever run out, that's taken away. They already get $250 stipend for living in the city besides that. But yeah, we have seven living in the city.
7 out of 39.
Out of 35 now.
Well,
Authorized that physically we have.
7 out of 35. 12%. I was just curious.
Yep. It's a lot more than we've had in the past, but that's the way it is.
Not that anybody's approved, but I would hope for a sense of community to one day see that number higher. Just for the sense of community. I think to your point, Mr. Kerr, about the take home vehicles. I think it would help even with your community policing project, if you will, and for the Safe City program that we have, to see that number increase. Again, not asking anybody to move and and sell their homes, but I think incentives for new officers as well as they come on. And there's a lot of things that we're working on internally to see if we can make home ownership in the Marque easier for city employees as well. Because I think an investment in that would also be helpful as well. I would also be curious to know, out of your 39 officers, how many of them are homeowners? Just curious.
There's no way that I could compile that.
We'd have to ask the
Just
our
a straw
citizenry,
poll.
which basically
Just a straw poll, and the reason why I say that is because, and not just because of, again, why we're talking here, but for overall betterment of all of our staff. It's just something that we're looking to find out citywide for all of our staff, to see if there's an incentive to help them hopefully be better educated on how to purchase their own home, and then hopefully incentivize them to do so in the market, if that's a possibility. So we're working on different things to try to make it more of a holistic program.
I think where someone lives, a lot of times has to do with the school district and the kids and things like that, that really drives a person to live in one venue versus another. So, I mean, it's a,
That's my point.
it's definitely one of those situations where we could canvass the members and maybe do a little survey, because really the key, I think, is what would we need to do to get you to live in the city?
And that's
and
that is exactly what I want. You believe in it enough to work here, but do you believe enough in your work and in your abilities and your wherewithals to work here? What's it going to take for you to believe in it enough to also live here?
I think something else though, in small towns, because I have two sons that are officers. And what they tell me, one of my sons live in Texas City and works in Fairland. The other son actually lives in Texas City and works in Texas City. But what I found is, especially in the smaller towns, they're a little apprehensive because they are today pulling people over, having to write tickets, arresting people, breaking up fights. And then tomorrow, they're shopping with the kids in the grocery store. And I think that makes them a little anxious, that they can be exposed in that way, in the same area that they patrol. It's kind of what I've heard.
Yeah,
I
that's,
don't mind explaining to you why I don't live in the city.
Oh, no,
I just want you to understand,
Sure.
why I don't live in the city. I don't live in the city because as an officer, I'm already looking over my back when I'm off duty.
mhm.
I'm always ready to do my job, my duty, whether I'm here in the city or whether I'm at home, at neighbor's house, whatever the case may be. Living within the city adds that times 10 versus being out of the city. You don't have an opportunity to decompress.
You're never off.
That you're always, somebody's gonna knock on your door.
Yeah.
All right, when trouble happens, and you don't have that opportunity to decompress and separate yourself from the job for what time you can. Living outside of the city really provides that opportunity because you don't feel like you have to act on something unless it's something you're required by law to act for. Does that make sense?
Mayor, what you say is spot on. Even in a large city, I bumped into somebody I had arrested the night before for a felony and in a supermarket. And that's 150,000 population city. So there is a lot of merit to that. We with 19,000 population, we're going to bump into that person again. And we're going to have our wife with us and our kiddos. It's scary.
That's the bigger thing is what I'm hearing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You
It's
get concerned because now this person sees
Right.
my face and then my kids.
Right.
So that's not good.
So I don't know. That is a reality, the wake up call.
And so a lot of times it's helpful to know what would motivate you to want to live here. And that's not, I've been involved in many different, I guess, approaches to, I've seen some cities abate their taxes for an individual public safety worker that haven't lived in the city. I've seen cities give you a down payment allowance if you move into the city. There are many different initiatives that could be, taken up and that may that kind of chip away at that, and we'll call it financial incentive or put the carrot out there, whatever it is. If you're a single person and you don't have to worry about your kids and your wife, you're going to be much more inclined to take that financial incentive to be in there because it's a little easier to take care of just yourself than it is to have to worry about your kids walking outside. If you, especially with take-home vehicles, we'll tell you that there's a upside and a downside. If you have a take-home vehicle, you're bound by the canons of your ethics to respond. So driving to and from, you're going to get more policing, even though you're off. And they're gonna be the eyes and ears. If they see something, it's not always practical for them to call it in. They've got to take action. So you get more policing coming and going.
And it's a deterrent too, Mr. in that neighborhood. That police car parked in that neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you park the car, then all your neighbors know who you are. And it's only natural. Let's be honest. It's only natural in times of dire need. You're going to seek out the person you know is going to be willing to help you. And frequently, if you're living in the city with a take-home vehicle, everybody knows you're the police officer, and everybody looks to you to solve problems for them. And it don't just have to be policing problems as well. It could be everything from code enforcement to civil issues, and it's just people seek you out. So
I think it'd be advantageous for us as a unit to try to create some sort of incentive for our younger officers. They come in, like more times than not, they're single, young, they want to be involved, they want to get the full experience of being an officer in the community. So we might be able to craft something, you know, where we can have our younger officers start out as residents. And as they get older and be residents, start to have families and things like that, it might change. But at least we would be able to keep that percentage of officers living in our community at the rate that we, you know, kind of think would be in our best interest.
Really, I think you benefit from visiting the question over and over again. You don't always get the right answer the first time. Sometimes it takes a combined approach and some input from the people that you're trying to, you know, incentivize, if you will, or just sometimes you find out it's not money. Sometimes you find out it's, you know, other aspects. So,
And that's fair.
I said, school districts, sometimes you can't move those, you know, and I know a lot of officers that have their children in private schools or religious-based schools that may not be in the venue they work in. So that's always consideration. So one other issue that we're not prepared to give you something in writing. There is already some language within the contract that deals with this initiative somewhat, but we think it needs to be expanded. We want to talk to you about expanding psychological services for the, you know, officers, you know, basically go out and do this job day in and day out. The contract, as it is currently phrased, deals with officers who have been involved in a shooting and a critical incident, or that may have been the recipient of serious bodily injury from somebody. But as we well know today, stress disorders and you know, all types of things can, you know, it can be cumulative. And so we want to look at the idea of, you know, expanding that service to the members. And there are, you know, every venue has its own approach to it. City, I'm sure, probably has an EAP program, but that's not necessarily the proper venue when you're talking about on the job, you know, just mental well-being, if you will. And sometimes that's counseling, sometimes it's evaluation and de-stress, whatever that may be. I'll leave that to the professionals, but we think that we might want to ask you to join with us in the study, if you will, if we can't get something really quick, to put in the contract, to expand the language. Maybe we can agree that we would create between, you know, whatever parties are interested. I know the chief and I know the officers association, where you sit down and kind of work on some additional services for the police officers who go out and do this day in and day out. And I would submit everyone needs them as far as public safety goes, but there are types of incidents that we have to deal with in the police profession. It could be an extremely graphic, critical incident that may not involve someone being shot. There may not, you know, it may be, you know, an accident thing, whatever. There may need to be debriefing. There may some counseling, if you will, or some, you know, and I know I'll butcher it using the right terminology, but that's one area that our officers have really, you know, talked about being a problem for them, because, you know, getting that practitioner and then getting it through your insurance and things like that, when it was on the job, you know, may be more difficult, more costly. But we know that, you know, the mental and physical well-being of all the officers is directly proportional to their ability to perform for the city. And so I think it makes good sense to look at it. Also makes good sense to finance it. And with regards to on the job, we already know it's an on the job entry, but how these things are dealt with sometimes through your administration of third party administration of workman's comp benefits or whatever is all over the map, depending on who you hire. But the reality is the need may be there may be area resources that all the departments around here use that you may have access to for a little or nothing as far as cost goes, but they may not be in the quote unquote workers' comp approved list, things like that. So we just know from our profession, and I'm sure it's no different for EMS and fire, they know who the practitioners are that work with the police officers in the area. And they may not be on anybody's plan. Maybe it's just getting them on the plan so that they have
Right.
access to the resources, or maybe it's, getting something so that within the context of the city, making sure that that service is available above and beyond your standard EAP approach. Because I think it's unique to the profession of what these guys have to do sometimes that bring them into direct, conflict, if you will, with the pressure and post-traumatic situation. And so we just want to look at, and not having a bunch of language thrown in front of you or a tried and true program that we can say is the 100% way to do this. We think it'd be a good idea to maybe agree within the context of the contract that we'll put together a committee that will work on that, to bring back recommendations, which is a little bit, I know for a fact if it's identified, a clear course of action is set out that makes the best sense, you guys are going to do it. That's just the nature of what I see sitting at the tablecloth from you. But I think working with the chief and the association, maybe somebody from HR, I don't know what practitioners that you have in the city that want to have a say in it, but I think that they can do it justice. And I think you can broaden it a little bit.
In this past year's budget, the council approved a social worker to be embedded in the police department. Part of that role, the council vision was to help with victims assistance in the community, but part of that role was to be there for the officers, to be that first level of contact, for an officer to be able to say, I'm not feeling good, or I'm having an issue. Or for that person, once they would get to know the officers, to be able to watch and know patterns of behavior and be able to say, Officer so-and-so, you seem off, are you okay? So that was the intention behind that social work. Now, there's been a tax rollback, and we're trying to scramble to see, what we have to cut. But we've already been thinking along those lines, so I think there can be some consensus.
One of the things I want to point out is, when you talk about officers and sitting down and, for lack of a better description, burying their soul. Okay. Most officers are not going to sit down with anyone that works for the city. I mean,
That's the point I was going to make.
it's just a fact. It's not that we don't trust you. Okay. It's not that we don't trust the city, but an officer who is dealing with an issue needs not only to have the ear of somebody, but they have to have complete trust in that person. An officer is not going to trust someone that works for the city because they may say something that in the context of the conversation may be something that, doesn't mean a lot to a professional, but to a layman could mean something else. All right. And having somebody that works for the city makes that an uncomfortable situation on how confidential is that and how confidential can it be? I hate to say it, but every department within this city has a rumor mill. There's now City Hall's got rumor mills, Public Works has rumor mills, the PD's got rumor mills. Having a professional that the officers can contact, talk to, make meetings with, that is outside of the city, it's outside of the police department, provides that level of trust, that level of security, because they're already unsecure with what they're dealing with to begin with. We're not built to be mentally, I won't say unstable, but just we're we're built in a different way to handle things. It's just part of what we do. And when we get shook a little bit, it's a little hard to sit down and talk about, and whatever we can do to provide those officers a certain level of comfort and security, that's what I'm shooting for. That's what we're looking for.
So what I would say to that is the social worker was never envisioned to be a therapist. They're just, a social worker is there to be the conduit for all the resources, right? So that's what I wanted to be clear about what council vision was. This person is not a person that you would go to and say, hey, I'm having this issue. This person is a person that,
Right.
hey, I need to talk to somebody, or hey, I need to, what are the resources? Where are they? And that person would be able to provide you with all the resources, and you would then navigate that yourself. So we're clear on that. It definitely should be conversations among staff members, whether they were within the police department or without. Only a conduit to get you what you need, or to be on the outside looking in, saying, things may seem like they're off. Let's see if we can get some resources to these folks.
I just
Well-
think with a committee, if we can create a committee and sit down on both sides, I think that we can come up with a plan that's going to benefit the city.
Yeah.
Because when something like that happens, we want to make sure that we take care of the people involved, whether it be police or fire or, public works, whoever it is, because we want them to continue to serve and provide the services that they're supposed to the citizens.
If I can here, just to chime in, I'm curious, and I say this going back to the crime rate to find out, but the 4 or 5 cities closest to us in crime rate in our proximity are Texas City, Galveston, Dickinson, Baytown. Along those lines, I'd be curious to see how they handle this. Is there a group of folks that they may work with for these services that maybe we could reach out to then get with them, as you mentioned, maybe find out from our HR perspective, from our intern perspective, could we align our services to also serve similar?
And that,
I'd like to see if that's a possibility.
and that's why I was suggesting us, basically put in the wording that we create a committee and allow the committee to basically come up with that and come up with a full plan as to how we want to approach that. And then once the committee has reached what they've got, and then we would come back and present that, and we would, then solidify another contract,
In that
but
case, we'd have to RFP that. That type of service would have to be RFP unless it's contractually.
I agree with you 100%. What we're talking about is, in former agreements that I'm aware of, there have been things that just couldn't materialize at the bargaining table because of the amount of research that had to go into, let's say, just the lack of better possibilities, promotional, let's change the promotional process. Well, they created a committee within the context of the contract. So if they came up with something, then they could bring it back and through a memorandum of understanding, modify the process, if you will, or the contract, because we're governed by contract, covered by state law. So much like this is, if it's an injury on the job, then it's covered by workers' comp, but there are so many idiosyncrasies of that process about, provider having to be on the approved list, have to be within the network that you provide through your, workers' comp. There's so many, the funnel gets narrow and narrow. And so we know that maybe having a committee is the best approach because we can't give you the magic bullet right now. We don't even know that we know what that is. We do know that these venues, we know that there are some name brand sought after professionals in the area. And I'll just say police psychologists, for the lack of better terminology, that many of the departments utilize and they allow their people to go to. And so if we could identify those people, and that would resolve the question, it might be something as simple as, in addition to the approved workman's comp practitioner list, these folks could be used. you know, which, because a lot of this has to do with the officer's view of the credibility, trusting, you know, and, you know, when you know, like Galveston police officers that swear by a particular practitioner, but they're not on anybody's list, well, then you have some trust there, but you can't access it. And you might be able to access it through your own dollars, spent out of your own pocket, don't misunderstand me, but, you know, we're thinking that it may be in some cases, it's not about the how, it's the who. And sometimes not being on the list or not being on the approved list is, and I'm gonna make some assumptions here. I'm assuming that you get your workers' comp coverage through a third party, and it's probably the Texas Intergovernmental Risk Pool managed by TML. And I deal with situations with them on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, I know the rules and regulations, and I know every third party administrator, they try to stay within the context of the statute. So when you have a network, and that's what you buy, if you will, and their administration, these folks may not. In fact, I find routinely these types of folks are not in those networks. And so, and if there's a deficiency anywhere in workers' comp, I'll tell you, it's in that area. So, and it may not have that big cost attached to it. It's not necessarily about money sometimes. It's about a best practice that results in the greatest level of success with regards to those first responders that you want to keep at the top of their game, in my humble opinion. And we can tell you some names of some police psychiatrists and psychologists that are respected in the area of these two counties, and you may even know or heard of them before, but the current process and or procedure and or matrix that's within the city may not allow for you to go to use those people without doing it out of your own pocket. And that's what we think that we could look at, find out what the best approach is. And, you know, we know the chief, you know, always interested in making sure that the guys are tip top form and out there, you know, pulling 100%. And sometimes the traumatic things you have to deal with, critical incidents, maybe you weren't the person that was actively required to use deadly force, but you were the people that were there and saw it. And it's not just like the current contract language says, the person who had to take someone's life or someone who's been assaulted. Seriously, it's a bigger picture than that. So, but for efficiency and for cost effectiveness, I think you have to study it. You have to put it in paper in such a fashion that make 100% solid, good, efficient sense all the way around the game with the chief, with the union, and the members. So that's where we're coming at you.
Going along with what John's saying, speaking from personal experience, some years back, I had an incident on duty where, as part of our standard operating procedure, you're required to go see like a psychologist or something like that, just to make sure you're okay with what happened. And the woman they sent me to literally said she doesn't normally do this kind of thing and didn't know what questions to ask me. And that's the woman that I went and saw that the city set up for me. So that's legitimately what she told me. Is I don't normally deal with these kind of cases, so I'm not quite sure what questions to ask you. And basically just asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then that was the end of it. So finding, not all psychiatrists or psychologists or whoever it is we go and see are not all tailored to, you know, this type of work. So just because it's covered by workman's comp doesn't mean it's gonna be a good fit for our department. So, you know, if we find someone that does tailor to, you know, whether it's PTSD or it's any of that kind of stuff, then, you know.
Let me ask you this, because those folks that y'all have recommended to y'all from other departments that are, you know, good people, good therapists, why wouldn't they do the work to be a part of all networks? Does that make sense? Did that come out right? Like why wouldn't they say, you know, I want to do what I need to do to be a part of the network that the LMPD uses?
That I'm not sure of. I don't know why they don't. Like,
I was just wondering, and it was just a question. I was wondering, is there certain criteria that they have to meet or not meet?
That I'm not quite sure. Are you talking about why they don't market to us?
Yeah, you know how we have, you know, like with the insurance, some physicians are in network and some are out. So like, I assume that's how it is with therapists. Some are in network, some are out. those that are out, that are good, right? That specialize in this type of stuff. Just thinking out loud, why wouldn't they attempt, because they are so gifted in this area, why wouldn't they attempt to make themselves available from a business standpoint, right?
Right.
Growing the business.
If they have a private practice, would a city be willing to pay as much as a regular citizen?
And that's, yeah, right, right. And that may be a factor, maybe their rates are higher. I mean, I will say, whatever we need to do to
Sure.
get you comfortable with making sure that your mental health is where you need to be as a human being, right? I'm willing, and I would assume the council's willing to do it, so that goes without saying, we're on board. But I'm just thinking out loud, as to why, why would they make you have to run that?
Patty, you got something?
Yeah, Patty,
I was gonna say that. State with our conference, civilians compared to first responders, there's a big difference. If they're having, what they have to deal with every day, they have a regular psychiatrist or counseling, help them. So they have a focus now on just public safety, especially police, what they do with empire, separating that. So I can get some names for y'all across the state, everybody's worried about it, concerned about it, and knows the need for it. So, but I thought we were focusing on
do it.
but compared to what they need, they don't need somebody that they can't trust. They're dealing with completely something different, even different environments. So I can't get names now and talk about it. They're using them around the city, they're using some around the state, just for police. Some just for fire, or some just for first responders. So I'll
That might be the best.
and they can meet with them, they can have to meet with them.
So it's totally different. It's a,
John, let me,
it's a procedural.
let me just make sure I understand. So what you're mentioning is what you'd like, what the union would like to do is have a special psychologist, psychiatrist that we could send somebody to that needs assistance. And Patty would be the one to figure that out. Is that doable?
Well, what I'd like to do is create that committee, and that committee, can have both sides, union representation, city representation, and come together, make a plan, come up with a plan. And then once they get that done, then we can sit down
Okay.
and we can have an opportunity to look it over and decide whether we want to implement that or whether we want to hold and wait until the next, but remember, we're doing a 3-year contract. Putting the stipulation about the committee in there and being able to come back and revisit that for approval, given the fact that we're doing a 3-year contract, is very important. And it's because we're not going to sit down and have a negotiation if we have a 3-year contract for 3 years. So having that opening to be able to get that in once we come up with a plan and what direction we want to go, that's amenable to both sides and stuff, that's going to benefit the officers and benefit the city. That's what I'm looking for at this
Tell
point.
you right now, is does this cost money or is this a procedural issue that could be rectified with a better procedure, which might involve the chief, HR, the third party administrator for the city's workers' comp or not. And, so it just, if it costs money, we know that it's got to end up being a MOU, if you will, and it would have to be, they convince you it's the right thing to do, and then you've got to go convince the mayor and the council of something that they want to invest the money on. So that's the city process. But we think that on the near term, this may not necessarily be something that costs you more money than would be anticipated. It may be the process of selecting. If the department, a major department, for instance, their model would be, we have a police psychologist or psychiatrist on the staff of our police department. So that Dallas is the LA's, they don't have one or two, they have several. And so, and they're paid for by the city and probably even employed as city employees, but it's a whole different mechanism. And so, we know those models work well, but we don't know that that's the cost-effective approach here, where maybe it's just getting the right names on the right list to be approved, especially in workers' comp situation, because I would submit to you that you don't get to pick the people that are on the approved workers' comp list. That's a process outside our purview. Now, it doesn't mean that Patty can't send them a name of somebody that we'd really like to see on the list. But if they're not willing to fill out the forms and do all the things, the pre-qualifications, if you will, they're not going to be added to the list. I can guarantee you that. That's just the way this process works. So when you ask why wouldn't these people want to practice, I'm assuming that most of them want to accept all the insurance that they can get because it's part of their book of business. But there are some insurance companies that don't, through contractual arrangements, give preferred pricing and preferences to people that they want to meet a certain criteria. And everyone doesn't necessarily subscribe to it, especially in the medical industry. And so you have people who are in and people who are out. But if it happens to be that you have a different insurance company than one city over, and their plan has a particular police psychologist that lots of people like to use in their plan, but yours don't, well, see, therein lies the problem. It may not be the most cost-effective way to do it, would be yet to be seen, I think. And it may not cost money. It may be the selection. Maybe the chief goes to the point of agreeing that we should have that practitioner that we all trust and know. Maybe it's the same one that all the other departments use. I can't say that. We do know there are several practitioners throughout this policing region here that are very well trusted.
And
I
that's
can't
what
tell you
would
what
like
the
to have.
charge. I
No,
can't tell you.
the charge, here's the reason why I say that, because Ms. Patty, we're meeting this week with the insurance folks. Or the 11th, so next week. So on Monday, we're having a meeting with our insurance folks. If we had that list of respected folks in the region to say, hey, insurance
Right.
folks, we need to add this plan for our first responders. Here's a list of people. What do we got to do to make that happen? And help them get this resolved a lot faster. That way they're not shooting for a needle in a haystack. If you already have a preferred list of folks, here's the reason why. You're saying that it might take some time essentially to get this done. I want to at least first start with who here is already qualified or already on the list,
Right.
and who's not. And then at that point, then you guys can look forward and say, well, we like person A, B, C, and D, but we don't like E, F, but we like G. There we go. So that's our list. We compare that to what's available, and then we come back and say, look, here's what's available. But to further say what Mayor Love was stating is this is not something that we want to wait too long to incorporate.
Right.
The importance of it is very high, and arguably higher than every single dollar and cent that we're going to talk about here. Because y'all's well-being is important. It's important. So having said that, if we're able to get that list of a certain preferred list of practitioners that already exist in your circle that you may know of, within proximity, we don't want folks driving all the way to Houston or wherever else. If it's possible to prevent that, to get these services somewhere nearby within our proximity that are respected, that you have good feedback on, please present that so we can try to see what we can have our insurance folks do when we meet with them. And we'll make that a point of conversation when we meet with them on Monday. If you're able to do that between now and Monday, but it's possible.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get a list together. If not, then
Even a partial, one. I mean,
Yeah,
at
we-
least to start.
I think we can use some names pretty quickly.
Sure.
But also, I would encourage to maximize input from the officers because we may not know the only ones. And to me, this type or this area is a very trust-driven situation.
Absolutely.
And so giving the officers the opportunity for input, confidential input through the organization, if you will, I think it would be a valuable source, but you could get some names that way as well.
And I'm not trying to like pressure or rush you guys. We can always go back to them, but we're in the process of going through our entire insurance renewal process now. We want to make sure that we're vetting every single opportunity. So your timing is perfect. Unfortunately, it's just a short gateway because we're meeting with them on Monday.
yeah, also the language that we end up incorporating will be important as well for, so I mean, that's something that I'm not gonna be able to provide by Monday or anything. And like I said, that's why I suggested the committee was to allow the time for that language, the vision, the direction, all to be able to, worked out and then, be able to present basically a full program that would, provide the benefits to the officers and, allow the city to be able to provide for them in that aspect.
Okay.
Well, I think we're pretty close to wrapping up on our side here, but I would suggest that maybe we take a 5-minute caucus or something, so I can compare notes with everybody on the team before we, say we're done. That way, anybody that had a thought on, would you have a problem with that? Maybe taking 5 or 10 real quick?
Yeah, we're gonna probably.
Take a 10-minute caucus.
Because I think we're getting short on time, but I don't want to miss anything, and I'd like to
Certainly.
recap with these guys, especially on the psychological deal real quick, and then we'll come back. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, during our talk, we pretty much prepared notes and we're prepared to work forward and give you a list of, I'll say mental health practitioners that are, favored around the community. Take us a few days to pull that together, but we'll at least give you some upfront information. Maybe you could utilize in your meetings. And then basically everything else we've laid today, we've laid out all the things that we want to throw on the table at this juncture and give you the opportunity to, look at, we can communicate via email if you have questions or you want additional information, so forth, that we can bring out at the next meeting. But that's pretty much wrapping it up for us today. This is everything that we have on the table. Like I said, we all know that dollars and cents are, they're painstaking process. This is, representing the membership, what they think are important and things that we want to lay on the table, or basically lay at the feet of the, city manager that would be suggesting improvements we'd like to look down the road for. So, and we're open book, so anything that we can help you with, respond to, we're more than happy to do so.
One of the things that we're prepared to do, we're already prepared to provide an update on how the CBAs are going, and further discussion on that at Monday night's meeting during our executive session amongst several other items that we have to discuss. In doing so, one thing that would be helpful is understanding essentially this document we presented us is, do you have a general idea of what these blanks would look like based on the data that you've been able to gather? Do you have a general consensus of what you think in your ideal that these blanks look like?
Yes, sir, and I could, we would have handed it to you, but I found some calculation errors earlier this morning because it didn't pull down the formula all the way, or are they giving you something? But we can transmit that back to you by email or send it to Susie directly, however you want to do it.
If you could do it through the email that we have, I think we're all on it. Susie's on it, Chief's on it, and myself, but during budget time, you would have to take that consideration. And like I mentioned before, you will lose some folks probably in your police department as a likely result of this, because the pie's not getting bigger. So we have to figure out how that's going to happen. So whether it's people, whether it's services, whether it's whatever, what would have you. That's a tough decision that's going to be made once we have your formal ask. Before we begin the like negotiation back and forth on which submit for that conversation. So the sooner you can get us that, we can compile all the information, review it, and then look at it, and then bring it to council, because we are meeting Monday night for an update anyways. So the more tangible items you have before then, the better. So having that would be extremely helpful.
When did you say the next meeting was?
Our meeting with council is Monday night at 6, and it would be an update through our executive session what we're intending to present.
Help us to get direction from the entire council, so we can come back with a
One thing that might be helpful, if you got that one sheet we're writing on, the actual sheet, it came from the city originally. It was done by Susie. I assume, I think it was finance director that emailed to just to get an idea of what it is.
Sorry, all my stuff ended up out of order, fell out.
You'll know what I'm talking about. It had a column that had every officer on the department and their classification. So it was like 01, 2, 3, which corresponded with the steps, and then the through the corporal sergeant and lieutenant. And I can cost this out using their format and their numbers because I already have them.
That was changed.
But yeah,
Sure.
this was, I was going to show him. This is from before. She'll probably know when talking about, just kind of give you an idea.
So,
This is the final format I put it in, but after the spreadsheet took us. And I use that data to format over the paper and come out with that number, and then she just had to check it, to make sure that it was accurate. That might expedite the process. Well, if she could send me the current version, which, my observation would be everybody here is the bank one year. That doesn't mean that they've gone through their stuff. It doesn't mean that they're still in departments, but I can't calculate the current spreadsheet I have now. Because you lost personnel, also promoted people and stuff like that. So if I had nothing more than just that spreadsheet, that she's been before updated with today's personnel, then I can help her by running the numbers. So this is the way we present it back to y'all from last meeting. She took it, by spreadsheet. Recalculated when he said it was accurate, so that might be helpful.
Did you? Not sure. I want to take your only copy. Do you have another copy of this?
Yeah, I've got it on the computer, I just can't show you.
No, just making sure before I get that you guys have your copy.
What does that one say at the top?
City current 2020-2021.
Well, there were different variations that we used because there was different modeling that was being used that we talked about.
I want to make sure before I took it that I wasn't taking your only copy.
It's her spreadsheet. All I did was put the borders on it, made it so that I could print it out, but these were all her calculations. And we just took the original spreadsheet, and we did some modeling. Because we didn't, it wasn't a straight across the board, we did some modifications with the paper and update. Which is in essence, might be a more effective, efficient approach to the use of your money. Again, in any given budget year, we help you tailor the plan moving forward, but maybe not necessarily cost the exact across the board raise. That's kind of what we were modeling on and worked on last night, this morning, but we hadn't come up with the final because the calculations, I printed them out, but the calculations were wrong because I didn't bring it through. But if you could ask if she could forward me the new information spreadsheet, I could help her out by, putting numbers on it and she can double check it.
Any other questions, John?
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you, do what now? Okay, go ahead.
I said, you type it on the computer, I gotta get that smile, G. Say, so I don't look so serious all the time, man.
Oh, I didn't even know I was in the picture. I was reading. All right.
She got a computer.
We don't
What kind of computer is that, Chief? You don't even know, do you?
It's our HP that Kyle gave me. Beyond the joke.
Whatever college.
They got Kyle gave it to that one.
No, this is very good information. I'm very encouraged. I would like to have this so I can present it forward to whenever you do feel.
I'm going to email you the things I've handed you. That way you can send them along to the people that need them. And by the same token, it's easier sometimes to play with the spreadsheets if you have them. So this study that has a cover sheet on it, I'll send you because there's no secrets here. So I'll send you that spreadsheet, which may be the catalyst for you wanting to look at something like Brendan, for instance. Just while we were on break, I took, preliminary look, their police budget has some compound funds that you probably don't have because they have a criminal law enforcement fund, which I think is 1/4% of their sales tax. I have to do more research, but they also have grant funding, but they're right at, as far as the police department budget, So without knowing how many people it is and all that, you come up with a relative comparison, but it sounds to me like they put some significant resources towards it. And an additional 52,000, which I suspect is a quarter cent of their sales tax. So they zero in specifically for a law enforcement fund, which is certainly available to you guys, but you're probably at the max now. So you'd have to rob Peter to pay Paul if you want to do something with sales tax. So, but there's a lot of ways to look at this stuff. Like I said, it's real. Everything I've looked at thus far tells me that your immediate market, police market, where people might go to work at with their crime rates compared to yours, stuff like that, is probably the best model to use. And whether we use abroad or up front here, a competitive market is driven by a competitive market. So you and every city is going to try to do everything they can. I guarantee it. It's just, I mean, I can already give you some preliminary numbers in other cities that we're bargaining in and have already agreed to and tell you what they're doing. So, you know, it's nothing's done in a vacuum. It's all about dollars. So we get that. Anybody else have any?
I have a question. Okay, so you're talking about the pie's not getting bigger, which I understand, and you're talking about if, you know, any kind of increase for losing officers. Are you talking about losing officers that we have right now, or possibly we're not filling anymore?
No, I would say not necessarily officers, but it might be like from another section or someone else, and not necessarily bodies per se, just the budget's not getting any bigger.
No, I mean, I
So
understand.
if, for example, we can get a police car, and again, I'm not saying this, but let's say, for example, we could save 10,000 on a police car, then that would be 10,000 that we could contribute towards this project. Basically, bottom line is we're already doing whatever we can to cut all of our other admin costs throughout the city. But as you guys know, police and fire take up about 65, well, 67, 68% of the city's budget. So collectively, that's what I mean by the pie not getting bigger. So for us, it's not necessarily cutting any of those. Hopefully we can add, you know, that's a challenge. So we have to add bodies and add services and also add pay while not increasing the pie. The question is, where's that going to come from? It might mean we may have to at least take a hit for 1 year in training, or, you know, it's just finding out which way to do it.
I was just trying to get clarification, because I think what you had said was we're gonna lose officers.
That's not.
I was just trying to get.
No.
Let me be clear
Yeah,
from
I apologize.
our perspective as council, right? And you know, say such job is bring us all sorts of recommendations. But I have not heard any council member in the retreat yesterday or in any time that we talked after we go back, talk about laying officers off. So that has never been a conversation that I've been a part of. We do have positions that we put in the budget for you guys for last year that we didn't feel. Some of the street crimes, things, narcotics detectives, things like that, they aren't filled. They may be casualties because we added those with the 55-cent tax rate, right? So now that you go back to 47, those monies aren't available. But let me be clear. Number one, it's SASA's job to bring all sorts of recommendations. Number two, no council member that I have had a conversation with has ever suggested that we lose any police officers. So did I answer that?
Yes, sir.
Emphatically?
Well, because it's a public hearing,
For my misunderstanding.
everybody at the table here, we understand that this discussion points, but somebody who's an onlooker from the Zoom meeting or something might get the
absolutely.
impression that this is a long process of budgeting and council prerogative and decision making and stuff. You know, we know what we were communicating, but some onlooker that's taxpayer says, oh, I don't want to lose any police officers. It's not on the table. What's on the table is
Absolutely not.
y'all rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work of governing the city as you do each and every year. And there'll be hard and fast decisions, but you know, hopefully
And
everything will be to augment, makes this a safer community.
absolutely. And then to add to that, on the contrary, assuming that we could get the recruits, we would like to add if it's possible. It's just the challenge this year more than ever is how do we do it without the pie getting bigger, right? So where do we cut? You know, where do we find? And that's what we're all taking, you know, like the challenge to find out how we would do that. All right. Anybody else have anything? Any other questions? So we'll wait whenever you can provide that, and then we start with the tough, tough decisions to be made. Bring that to council Monday night, and we'll find a way.
That's great. Well, we certainly appreciate you guys' time. We know you got a lot to keep up with.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for your time and your diligent work on this report. Very thorough, very complete.
Thank you.
Okay.